is yes, text messaging and emails and letters and anything in print is a form of a permanent record. However, everything that we say and think is part of the permanent record of eternity. And who will judge us for these things? Hello, today is July 1st, 2018, and it's somewhere around noon. This video is inspired by a female who was convicted based on some text messages. There's not one person anywhere that hasn't said something stupid at some point or even trash talked with their friends. So no one can say, well, look at that person, because everyone's guilty of it. Now, where this ties home for me is with my case, the officers bringing up the last text message of the May 4th, 2013 event. The last text message came in about 40 minutes before they allegedly arrived to the scene, which would have put them at the scene based on their testimony prior to the area closing. This is important. So what I want to do is go through the text messages and show the context of the text messages. And this is kind of difficult to do, not because of the meaning that they were trying to present, but knowing how people are being judgmental, and the text messages between my friend and I were just trash talking. Nothing to do with the female, nothing to do with anyone specific. It was just, we were just talking. So what happened with those text messages is the one officer, who's no longer an officer anymore, who's now in a profession not even remotely close to what he aspired to be. The last text message and one about 40 minutes prior were combined and taken completely out of context. And I suspect that he never anticipated me bringing forth those text messages as evidence, because he testified that that last text message came to my phone after I was handcuffed, after I was beaten, after I was put in the back of the police cube van, and after they began their alleged investigation. Now, one of the things that I tried to put forth during the trial with the first and second voir dire was the fact that the officers had tunnel vision. And no matter what I said, wouldn't have made a difference. There was nothing I could have said or did differently that would have avoided what happened to me, because they were on a mission. They were on a mission because of the false accusation by the female, which then changed into them thinking, well, there was allegedly prostitution. Then it changed to some sort of sexual exploitation. And, well, none of that ever came before the courts, because none of it was true. Before I begin to put the text messages of my case into context with tangible evidence, I cannot stress enough that the said text messages were made known to the two officers after they sucker punched me, after they put a gun to my head, after they handcuffed me, after they beat me leaving me crippled, after they dragged me to the back of the police cube van, after I lay there for a long time bleeding and in pain while they allegedly investigated, and after they realized the false sexual assault claim against the female and their alleged assumption of prostitution were wrong. The following text messages occurred after all this, so they didn't do what they did because of the said text messages. Keep in mind, the police had my cell phone for 3 months with all the following text messages and more. The first photo is of many examples of evidence I submitted after terminating my second lawyer. I was expecting the text messages and much more evidence to be submitted during the trial, in part to put the text messages into context, as I knew my personal integrity was compromised. The female had texted me around noon. I had not planned to meet with her that day or any time soon. We exchanged a few texts. As I was explaining to her I was working on the landlord's deck. She does acknowledge this in another text. I was also texting with the landlord about the progress with the back deck. There were 2 huge wooden back decks that needed a lot of work, as well as the gardening area and such. I had taken the back seats out of my vehicle because of renting a sander and buying materials for the backyard. Because this was an ongoing project, there was no need to put everything back inside. After I told the female what I was doing, she said good luck to me, as seen in the previous screenshot. And that was it. No plan to meet up. By mid-evening that day, the female and I decided to meet up. I was feeling good about my productive day. I even helped someone take materials to their home from the store. Their car was too small to carry everything. Remember, I was wrapping up my investigation with the female. Earlier that day, a buddy from my province of origin texted me, and we texted on and off all day. At the time, we recently reconciled some differences after a few years of not talking. He told me he was at his part-time job. I did the same type of work during one of my post-secondary times. We chatted back and forth about nothing. At 10:20 p.m., I texted him to let him know who I was with, what I was doing, and to document the time. Plus, I recall being bored out of my tree as the female was also texting someone. The now former officer would combine this text with the last text message to create a new false narrative about me. My buddy replies, and it is clear we are just chattering back and forth about nothing. So far, nothing related to the female of my case, nor will there be. So I decided to be funny and tell him to start picking up hot chicks, so we can have something to talk about. No reference to the female of my matter. Not that either one of us have anything against gay people. However, our not being gay, the thought of 2 guys having sex is not appealing. Plus, I knew that story would trigger him in a humorous way. I knew I got the response I wanted, picturing his face. Although sexual in nature, this part of the conversation had nothing to do with the female. He sent a laughing out loud text to show he knew we were just joking around. I decided to press him a bit more on the topic, knowing he would take it as a joke. Again, our not being gay means 2 guys having sex is far from a sexual turn-on. You can observe the 2 of us texting nonstop moments prior to 11 p.m. This in itself shows I could not have been having sex with the female prior, and I could not have been planning to have sex with her as my thoughts were elsewhere. About this time, the 2 officers approached me as I waited. I sent my last reply of the evening at 11 p.m. My asking if he took her picture was knowing he wouldn't have, but my thoughts were based on the following. Sometimes we would send photos to each other of whatever we were doing. Sounds stupid, but stupidity comes with boredom. As part of my evidence exhibits, I show many examples of what LOL means, so the trial judge had a documented definition of what it means. It can mean not to be taken seriously, as with the case with our text messaging back and forth. Here is a text message of that evening that set off a whole new tangent against me. Remember the previous text messages and how it relates to this one. Yes, crude, but these were not my words. At one point, the officer clearly links the 10:20 p.m. text with the 11:10 p.m. text, telling the court the last text message was to do with the female. Keep in mind, whatever the female told the officers about the false accusation not being true and their alleged thought of prostitution taking place was shut down after they almost took my life. So they had to justify what happened, and with the help of the female adding new lies to the mix, they thought they had something. So the officer admits he had read the previous text messages and still somehow linked the 2 said text messages together to create a new false narrative. As I mentioned previously, my buddy and I had reconciled some differences after a few years, so we were catching up. I clearly told him of the December 2012 false allegation and my objective with the female. Remember, I also kept an online journal and videos about this, see my other videos for more details. The lower half, I borrowed a laptop and emailed my buddy to tell him what happened. I had no idea what he texted. Keep in mind, I was still in shock of what happened to me and I was in much pain. The upper half was my buddy's reply. He was as confused as I was and in shock as well. So my buddy sent our whole conversation via email and explained to me what he meant, which is exactly how I would have interpreted it. The problem is when busybodies, in this case glorified busybodies, stick their nose in other people's business and make uninformed conclusions. But let us not forget, they had to justify what they did to me. Am I guilty of trash talking with my buddy? Yes. Is this a crime? No, it's not. Am I going to apologize for trash talking? No, I'm not. All the text messages and the false narrative surrounding the text messages was created after the two officers did what they did to me. Regardless by chance or design, they took the text messages way out of context. And if they didn't run headfirst into the trap I set for the female, I would have had no way to prove any of this. There are many more complexities to my case. For example, my backpack being in the vehicle at the time, which had my laptop, other electronics, valuable personal items, and my identification and such. I carried that backpack everywhere with me, including to the organization where all this bullshit began for me. This picture is another evidence page proving I carried my backpack with me always. Over the years of hardship, I learned to carry these things with me because I had things stolen while staying in other people's homes. Another example is the two officers finding a wedding ring and a baby sock in my backpack and testified that I was a married businessman out with a hooker. Well, this picture is another piece of evidence that I put in my trial, which is part of a newspaper article mentioning the wedding ring and baby sock. As I said, my backpack had my most valuable possessions. I never dreamt two thugs in costumes would steal my property to cover their asses. So here are several examples how and why my case became so complicated. Because two officers, one long fired, created another false narrative against me, and despite the only two charges, alleged obstruction and alleged assaulting an officer, I would have been convicted of the said via this new false narrative. Rather, I was convicted because I allegedly hurt the former officer's feelings. As for the female in the article who was convicted because of a text message, no one is more passionate about females getting away with so much, including murder, than I. If anyone should be shouting loudly against her, it is me. However, I must apply critical thinking, reading comprehension skills and such to her case. Am I implying she's a saint? No. Am I implying she was proper? No. Am I implying she should have called someone? Yes. Could have this been prevented? Possibly. But not to imply all this falls on her.
So I just wanted to go over those text messages for what they are. And, you know, there's been many people in the media who've been condemned because of trash talk. But again, I say there's not one person that's innocent of that, if that is some sort of immoral crime. And something else that people need to remember is, yes, text messaging and emails and letters and anything in print is a form of a permanent record. However, everything that we say and think is part of the permanent record of eternity. And who will judge us for these things?